All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join me this evening. Tonight we're going to be looking at tips and tricks to baiting successfully. Okay, so what are we going to look at today? So we're going to break it up into two. We're going to look at above ground baiting and then also in-ground baiting and our ever-ready system. So we're going to look at what we need to know as pest controllers, so a little bit of knowledge, the skills required to do the job, tools of the trade, what to expect when baiting, and then some tips and tricks at the end. So what do we need to know? The first thing I just wanted to clarify is the terminology that we're using. Okay, it's important, especially when we're explaining things to our clients, that we're using the right terminology. So colony elimination is exactly that. It's methods designed to kill the colony. And in my view, there's only two ways of doing that. One is with a direct application, if we're lucky enough to know where the nest is. The second is through a successful baiting program. All other methods, so things like dusting, foaming, treated chemical zones, all fall under that colony control. Okay, and it's important we establish the difference between the two. So termite biology and behavior. So termites are not just here for our own financial gain. They do play a crucial role in the ecosystems around us. So they're out there, they're breaking down cellulose, timber, leaf matter, not only for their nutritional value, but also returning nutrients into the soil. So they play an important role. During my sort of experience out there, I don't think our clients necessarily understand what termites are doing or why they're there. So I always used to take some time to explain this to my clients. And I used to describe termites as underground bees. And the reason being is that I think people have a little bit more understanding of how bees operate. And termites, we can use that analogy and sort of explain termites. So just like bees and termites, they have a central nest. And in that nest, they have a queen. And the termites are sending out workers looking for a food source. Once they find that food source, the worker termites are consuming that cellulose. They're turning it into a sugar inside their gut, and that's how they're feeding the entire colony. Taking it back to the nest, feeding the queen and everybody else. Very similar to bees harvesting pollen, bringing it back to the nest, turning it into honey, and feeding the whole colony that way. It's important that we explain this to our clients, or it's worth explaining this to our clients because it plays an important role or helps our clients understand the baiting program. And I'll go into that a bit later. All right, termite identification. So once we've established that there's active termites in the house, during our inspection, we need to know what type of termite we're dealing with. Okay, so I used to drill a very small hole into the workings, trying not to disturb them too much. And generally they would come to that breach pretty quick. You'd sort of see the antennas of the soldier termites, and it's the soldiers that we need to see in order to be able to identify the species. Sometimes I used to just sort of continue on with my inspection, come back sort of 10, 15 minutes later, and there they would be. So being able to identify the species that we're dealing with is going to contribute to what recommendations we're going to recommend when it comes to treatments. So things like if we're dealing with Coptotermes frenchi, especially down here in sort of Victoria, they can be quite shy and fickle, so we might need to adapt our baiting method accordingly. If we're dealing with Mastotermes darwinius, baiting is probably not even an option, so we might want to be doing some sort of ultra-4X treatment there. Porotermes, some of us might come across that. There are some down here, or dampwood termites. Again, they work slightly different. They're sort of small family groups. I say small, they can still be substantial size, but they usually need a specific environment in order to survive, and their name gives them away a little bit, dampwoods. So environmental changes, fixing that leak, changing the timber, things like that might be the best option for them. Okay, we need to know how termites get into structures and the different designs that are out there. So each house is going to have slightly different vulnerabilities and entry points. This is obviously identified during our inspection. And I used to explain this again to my clients. There's no harm in sort of letting them know the vulnerabilities, the conducive conditions, obviously, things like that. But I used to draw a very similar sort of diagram to this, explaining how the termites are getting into their house. And again, this plays a role, or identifying this plays a role in what potential treatments we're going to recommend. So lastly, we need to know the different types of treatments out there and which sort of situations they're best suited to. Obviously, tonight we're looking at baiting, and in particular with REQUIEM bait, with the active ingredient of chlorfluaziron. So what does that mean? It's a chitin synthesis inhibitor, a CSI. And essentially, as termites grow and mature, they grow into their skins and they shed their skins. Their outer skeleton is hard, and that's how they protect themselves. Once they've consumed the bait and they've molted, their new skins are thin and brittle, and they can no longer protect themselves, and they perish and die. So how does that bait, well, how do we get that bait back to the nest? And this comes back to that biology, behavior sort of area a little bit. And again, this is why I recommend that we sort of go into detail with our clients if possible. So we can use the natural feeding process of the termite to get that bait back to the nest. As I mentioned, it's the worker termites that are doing all the damage. They're consuming the bait. They're turning that bait, or that cellulose with the bait in it, into a sugar inside their gut. They're then feeding the rest of the colony, and they feed all the way back to the queen. Once that queen is infected and dies, the whole colony then collapses around that. And it's important to note that once that queen has collapsed or died, it can take some time for the rest of the colony to sort of disappear and decline. So you just need to be prepared for that. So that covers the basic sort of knowledge of what we sort of need to know. And I recommend you sort of go into a bit more detail in that if you wish. Don't be afraid to explain this to our sort of clients. It does set a good foundation for when we sort of start recommending the baiting program or how the baiting process sort of goes. So looking at some more of the skills side of things that we need to be successful. Okay, the first major stage, like most of the treatments that we come across, is going to be our inspection. It's a vital stage when it comes to termites, and we need to be doing a full termite inspection. We need to be providing a detailed inspection report with a termite management plan prior to conducting any termite treatments. Okay, I recommend that we look at the AEPNA Code of Practice, Termite Standard AS 366.2, and also probably your insurance companies might have some guidelines or recommendations on what they expect as well. Okay, communication, again, vital across all aspects of our industry. But we need to take the knowledge and the skills that we have, and we need to be able to present it in a way that our clients understand. Like I said, when I used to do it, I used to allow 10, 15 minutes at the end of my inspection, and I used to lay everything out, all the facts. Like I said, termite biology, the vulnerabilities of that specific building, how the termites are getting in, or what I've potentially found through that inspection, and then the treatment that I recommend and why. Okay. If clients understand what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve it, they're going to be on our side from the beginning. There's nothing worse than having a client that doesn't really understand, breathing down our necks at every service with unrealistic expectations. Okay. This will come with a bit of experience, and you'll develop your own sort of way of doing this. Patience, probably the hardest one to master if we ever can. But it's important to note that no two baiting programs are going to be the same. There's a number of variables involved, and I will sort of touch on these a bit later. But it's important not to rush if things aren't going to plan. We're always here to help. So we've got a good Ensystex team out there. Lean on them. They're always happy to help. It's sometimes easier said than done, but if you trust your install and you've explained everything well to your clients, then sometimes all the termites need is a little bit more time. Tools of the trade. We need a completely clean, separate set of tools away from our general pest sort of stuff, just for baiting. Okay, so we need a clean screwdriver, knife, torch, bait box or mixing box, screws, sounding stick. All of these need to be separate and kept away from our general pest stuff. Like I said, the reason being is that we don't want any contamination on these. Contamination is just going to cause us headaches. I used to keep mine in like a big Tupperware box in the front of my cabin of my truck, completely separate. Other tools that we might want to use are a Termite and a moisture meter. Okay, so what to expect when baiting? In short, anything and everything. So it's important, like I said, to understand that each program is going to be different. And why is that? So some of the factors that come into play, things like the species that we're dealing with, the time of year that we're baiting, colony size, distance to the colony from the baiting site, level of prior disturbance, and the environment that we're baiting in. All right, the second most crucial stage after the inspection is obviously the install. We want to be placing the stations or the above ground stations where the termites are feeding, so at the feeding front, if possible. It's not always available to us, but if it is, we want to be using that. We want to make a small wick into their workings with a nice, clean, sharp knife, minimal disturbance. Okay, we don't want to be ripping into it and knocking into it, just a nice little cut. Fill that cut with bait, and then place the bait box directly over that wick and secure it well. We want to be filling that bait box up to, or fill it with bait to the top. Bear in mind, the larger the food source, the more termites they throw at it. Okay, so that's important. As I've said, positioning is quite tricky. We want to try and minimize baiting from flight slits if we can, and or termite tubes. Again, it's not always possible, but if we can avoid these areas, that's great. The reason being is because I don't think that they have allocated these areas as food sources or sites for food. So it can be quite tricky to get feeding started. Also, especially with flight slits, when we get called out there, these areas obviously can be quite active directly after a flight. When we come back a week later, 2 weeks later to do the inspection or to do the install, these areas can become less active just because the flight's done, flight's finished, they want to sort of concentrate on other areas. So we need to be prepared for that as pest controllers. We also need to prepare our clients for that as well and be honest, outline the pros and cons. If we don't have any other choice, then that's what it is. We may have to do, again, more invasive inspections here just to sort of try and find more activity or find a more suitable baiting spot. And that needs to be discussed with your clients. Okay, so like I said, no two baiting programs will be the same, but they will generally follow a little bit of a similar sort of path. And I actually used to draw this graph, this is just made up, to my clients in my debrief. So they had a bit of an idea of what So along the bottom there, we've got time, and up the side, we've got grams of bait consumed. So we install the bait box, and we're then now waiting for those termites to get into that bait. It could be overnight, it could be a number of weeks. Both are perfectly normal, and that sort of comes down to some of those factors that I sort of explained earlier. We'll then get into a period of feeding as we're sort of climbing up this mountainside here. At this stage, we can breathe a sigh of relief. Our prayers to the termite gods have paid off, and we're just returning on a regular basis to monitor feeding, replenish the bait, and keep accurate records of the amount of bait that's being consumed. We'll then sort of hit a peak, so at the top of that mountain there, and then we'll start to sort of come down the other side. And as we come down the other side, we'll start to see telltale signs that the bait is starting to have an effect. So things like the workers will change color, change shape, usually first because they're the ones that are consuming the bait. They'll generally die off first, so we might start to see caste ratio changes. We might start to see more soldiers and less workers. And eventually feeding will slow down and stop, along with termite activity. At this stage, we might want to check other active areas that we found during our inspection that we haven't got a bait box on, just to make sure that termite activity has disappeared from there as well. If it hasn't, it might be an indicator that we've got a second colony attacking the house. It's rare, but it can happen, and just having those controls allows us to monitor that. So towards the end, we need to have 2 clear checks of the bait box, no activity, no feeding. We then need to do another termite inspection of the property, and then we can declare the colony dead. If we haven't done so already, we then might want to sort of implement some sort of preventative measure going forward to protect the house. So towards the end of our baiting program, another sign of colony collapse is alates. This is a Coptotermes infestation. And as you can see, the numbers can be quite dramatic. We need to be able to identify the alates. So as you can see, they're slightly bigger, about 10 mil or so in size. They sometimes have undeveloped wings on their back. But this is a good sign. It's usually an indicator that the colony has collapsed and dead, and these guys essentially have got nowhere else to go. But obviously, as we've sort of, especially if we've sort of seen that steady decline in numbers and we suddenly open it up and we see this, 1, we need to be prepared, and 2, we need to know sort of what we're looking at. But it's a good sign, so we can reassure our clients of that. All right, tips, tricks, and things to avoid. Contamination. Pest control or termite technician enemy number 1. As I mentioned, clean tools, clean mixing bucket, plenty of gloves. We want to be using distilled bottled water, not tap water, because of the presence of chlorine and fluoride. We just need to be super conscious of this, okay, at all stages of the process, of especially when we're at the install. So things like our sweat, if we've just had a smoke, hand sanitizer, chemical from the spider spray, if we've just sort of opened our canopy on our trucks, things like this, we just need to be careful, okay? It's just going to cause us headaches. I had a job where I was out at my client's house, and she was a bit of a germaphobe. I knew that. But I was getting to sort of week or month, sort of 3, 4, and I wasn't getting the results that I should have been getting. And I noticed that my client was going around spraying Glen 20, spraying all the doorknobs in the house with Glen 20. And I'm not talking about just a little squirt. I'm talking like a full-on drenching until it was almost sort of dripping onto the floor. So I was like, well, okay. I sort of gently investigated a little bit further and established that she usually does this prior to someone coming over and once they've left. But she'd forgotten to do it this time, which is why she was sort of doing it while I was there. So like, okay, bit of a light bulb moment. Had I inadvertently got Glen 20 in my bait somehow? So I went back out to the truck, cleaned everything, cleaned my bucket, cleaned my hands, made fresh bait, changed my gloves, Was then a little bit more conscious about sort of touching things on the way to my bait box, put the gloves on, took the old bait out, changed my gloves again, put fresh bait in, closed it up, and lo and behold, came back sort of a few weeks later and the entire box had been consumed. So there we go. Just be mindful of it. Bait consistency. So we want to be making this bait to a breadcrumb apple crumble mix. Okay, it needs to be holding its shape, so a bit of a snowball when we push it together. And if we give it a tight squeeze, a little trickle of moisture or water comes out the bottom. Back in the day, we used to sort of make it a lot wetter. We don't need to do that now. So we're looking for that breadcrumb apple crumble mix. Okay, it's important because this can affect termite feeding. If that snowball isn't sort of quite holding its shape, might be a bit dry, we might want to add a little bit more water. If we're getting into that mashed potato sort of consistency, then it's far too wet. We need to be adding a little bit more of the REQUIEM bait. We do not, and I repeat, we do not need to be adding anything else. Okay, definitely not blue Powerade, just clean water and the REQUIEM bait. Okay, termite technician enemy number 2, disturbance. Some disturbance is unavoidable, obviously, but we want to minimize it as much as possible. So here we have an example, and I see this a little bit. Bait box number 1 at the top there was the initial install. Perfect location where the termites are feeding. Everything done correctly. So happy days. We come back 3-4 weeks later. We find no feeding in that bait box, but we still got activity. So we install bait station number 2. We come back again another 3 or 4 weeks later. Again, there's no feeding in 1 or 2, which can be, I should have said, obviously, in bait station number 1, if we don't get feeding straight away, that's perfectly normal. We just need to give it a little bit more time. So then we install station number 3. All we're doing here is 2 things. We're creating unnecessary disturbance, which is probably or contributing possibly to us not getting that initial feeding. And 2, I think we're creating, or our clients can sort of pick up on this. We're sort of chasing the termites around the door frame. We look a little bit uncertain. The clients can potentially pick up on this and just sort of lose a little bit of trust. So if you trust your initial install, you've done nothing wrong, just give it a little bit more time and you'll find that the termites will get into it. Checking the bait stations. Again, we want to be minimizing disturbance. A great way of doing this is either at the install or at various stages of our services. We want to just be, we can push with a clean screwdriver, just some inspection holes, and you can sort of see that there, into that bait. So remember, the termites are feeding from the back of the station to the front. So when we open it up, from the front, we might not see much, but they could be consuming at the back there. So this is a great way of knowing what's happening without ripping into the bait, especially if they've just sort of started feeding and causing unnecessary disturbance. So replenishing the bait stations. So this is Andrew from Rogue Pest Management. I don't know whether he's on here. Developed a great little way of reloading the bait stations. He's cut the back off that above ground, and with a little homemade plunger, he's just sort of pushing that bait in with minimal disturbance. It's a great little way. Not only disturbance, but also mess. I used to be a bit of a shocker. Probably getting more on the floor than I did in the stations, but yeah. So a great little way of doing it. Remember, the beauty of REQUIEM is that you can make as much or as little as needed, depending on obviously what you're faced with when doing your services. Just make sure that there's plenty of bait there. As I've said before, the larger the food source, the more numbers they generally throw at that. Another little handy accessory, especially for us down here in Victoria, when it gets a bit cold, are heat pads. This is a hermit crab heat pad that I've used before, and you can just get them from your general pet stores. What termites are doing is within their workings, they're regulating a temperature and a humidity that's optimal for their survival. So a bit like us in winter, it's a bit difficult to keep our hands and feet warm. Well, termites suffer the same thing. So it's hard for them to maintain that temperature and humidity, because remember, it's coming from the central nest at the furthest extremities of their workings, which is why during those colder months or cooler months, we can see a bit of a decrease in feeding and activity. So just by creating an external warmth source away from that central nest can just encourage feeding during this time. A word of warning, okay, we don't need to be cooking the termites. We don't need to be racking up that heat. So just a little gentle heat. We don't want to be drying out the bait too much. And also, we don't want to be creating anything unsafe. We don't want to be melting bait stations onto carpet or floors or anything like that. So just use with a bit of caution. As I mentioned before, a couple of useful documents that we definitely need to familiarize ourselves with: the AEPNA Code of Practice for Subterranean Termite Management 2025, brand new one out this year, and the Australian Standard 366.2, Termite Management in and around existing buildings. Okay, get a hold of them, give them a read. They will provide some help. All right. Moving on to our EVER-READY system. So what is EVER-READY? It's an untreated natural source of cellulose. Okay, it's the same REQUIEM bait that we use in our above ground stations, just dried and made into a disc form, as you can see there. Those discs are then held in a Hessian bag, allowing access to that bait from all angles from within the station. The system provides ongoing protection to a property, either as a preventative measure or in conjunction with above ground baiting. So how does it work? If we had X-ray vision and we could see where the termite colony was, in most cases, there would be lots of foraging pathways all heading out in different directions, looking a lot like sort of tree roots. These stations are designed to pick up those foraging termites before they get to the structure. So it helps reduce the risk of attack. Because there's bait in there already, the termites can immediately start consuming that bait. And it works in the same way as before. So the active ingredient is still chlorphorazeron. We're still relying on that natural process of the termites feeding on that bait, taking it back to the rest of the colony, feeding the whole colony, and getting colony elimination. So tips for using EVER-READY successfully: the install, and more importantly, placement. So when we're presented with the house, we don't want to be putting these stations any closer than 400 mil from the perimeter. The reason being is that it avoids hitting any footings, and also, probably more importantly, avoids any sort of previous soil treatments that they may have done in the past. We want to be placing these stations every 3 to 4 meters around the structure, and we want to be thinking about where we place them. So we want to be looking for where the termites are most likely to be, so close to trees, nice irrigated flower beds, the lawn if we have to, just make sure it's nice and deep so it doesn't get whacked by the lawnmower. We want to be avoiding, if we can, it's not always possible, but core drilling through concrete and crushed rocks pathways. Okay, so just think about where we're putting them. What I used to do is I used to sort of walk around, put the stations where I would like to put them, and then I'd grab my client and we'd walk around together, and I'd just get a yes or no, or, you know, they might want to move. It avoids hitting any DIY electrical conduits that he's run to his shed. It avoids putting a station directly above their beloved pet that they've buried in their garden, or their prized rosebush, you know, things like that. So just, yeah, good little tip. So things to consider. We want to make sure, once we're happy with the placement, that we're burying or digging these stations down to finished soil level. So make sure that that lip or that lid is at finished soil level, not at grass level, not at mulch level, finished soil level. You can go a little bit deeper, even better. We need to be adding a focus, termite attractant, and I'll go into detail about that again a bit later. We also want to be digging a hole about 75 mil wide and about 200 mil deep. And you can get auger bits from Bunnings or another hard-wedge saw that fit into our cordless drills that make this process even easier. If we can, we want to be avoiding overly moist or wet ground. Okay, this is just going to reduce the lifespan of that bait. So when it comes to checking the stations once they're installed, there is no need to remove that sack. It is going to swell a little bit. That's perfectly normal, but we don't need to remove it. Okay, especially if they're feeding at the bottom there. There is a little drawstring in the top of the Hessian bag. We can just open that up and we'll be able to see signs of termite activity. If you've got a clean screwdriver, just gently sort of give it a prod and you'll be able to sort of test the integrity of that bait. If we do have feeding, depending on how much they've consumed, we don't need to pull that whole bag out all the time or every time. We can just sort of take a few discs out of another sack and push that on top to keep them feeding. And obviously that minimizes the disturbance there. It's also probably a little bit more cost effective for you guys. The inspection intervals can be pushed out to 6 monthly with these. But if they're active or we're getting feeding, we want to be sort of coming back every 4 to 6 weeks. From time to time, we might come across ants, the mortal enemy of the termite. If there's ants in the station, there's less likely to be termites in the station. A little capful of Hymenoptera ultra just into that ant-infested station is going to clear up the ant problem without interfering with the termites. Okay, so it's a handy little weapon just to have. Okay, lastly, focus. And why is it important? So going back to our termite colony and our foraging termites. As they're foraging, they're looking for food sources and water sources. And as timber decays in contact with the soil, it slowly releases CO2. And the termites can sense that CO2 and potentially divert their workings to investigate whether it's a worthwhile food source. By adding focus to our stations, and it has to be in contact with the soil, not on the top, not in the sack, in contact with the soil. It needs those microorganisms in order to work. It just replicates that timber decay and slowly emits CO2. Okay, that's easy done. It's easily applied at the install, at the bottom of the hole before we put the stations in. When it comes to 12 months later, so annually, we can just sort of sprinkle it around the top. We don't have to pull that sack out again and just mix it into that soil. It's a vital part of the system. Stations with focus get termites more often, okay? We've got the data there. If you're interested in reading it, just sort of reach out. I'm happy to provide that for you. And lastly, we've got a great team out there. They're always happy to help. Send them pictures, send them emails, get them out on site if you want them there. Yeah, we're always here to help you. Don't suffer in silence. Use our knowledge. We'll get you through it. And with that, I'd like to thank you again for turning up, tuning in, taking your time out to listen to me rambling on. I hope it's been of some use to you. I wish you luck out there dealing with termites. I find them fascinating little critters. And yeah, good luck. All right, thank you. I'll try and take some questions.
That was really good, mate. Thank you. That was awesome. And I just want to re-emphasize something you said at the end there, Alex. The team that we have reps in every state in Australia. These guys are not just reps; they're people that have been in the industry, hands-on pest controllers who've actually worked in the field. So they've got some plenty of knowledge, and they are available free of charge. We don't charge for that service, to come out and help you on site to solve problems with your termite baiting or any other problem you have with in the pest control sort of arena. So yeah, we encourage you to utilize that resource. Okay, so if you've got a question, feel free to chuck it on the text box or just ask it if you like. Yeah, in answer to your question, Jude, I can see what you've written here. I've had to do exactly the same thing in cases, particularly on a site I had in Orange where it was just solid rock like this, and we had probably about 3 inches of topsoil and in some places, and we had to do exactly what you've done here. It did work, it was effective. Remembering that termites are generally foraging in that top sort of, 8 inches of soil. So sometimes you have to do what you have to do, and what you've done there is it's not the best. Obviously, you want to have the station fully in the ground, but sometimes that's not possible, and you've done what you need to do. So well done. Yeah, that's fine, Jude. Well, what you said there, we've removed part of the bottom to make the top flush, which is better. You're better off taking some off the bottom of the station if you can't excavate anymore in order to make, because it's more important to have the top flush than to have the station sort of, a full 8 inches in the ground. So yeah, perfect. Room temperature water is typically fine. It really depends on the time of year as well, as you know. I know people that mix their water really hot, thinking, but really hot water is not going to be cool. The termites are going to be repelled by that. And if it's a really cold day, it's not going to stay hot for very long anyway. So I'd be more inclined to, if you've got a temperature issue, it's a really cold day or whatever, I'd be more inclined to do what Alex said, so far as using a reptile blanket or heat pad of some sort, and just slightly raise the temperature and keep it consistently that warm.
Lukewarm in winter is good.
Yeah.
A lot of my guys do that, and use the jug, and that's handy as well.
Just keep in mind too, one of the things that I find with termite baiting is that every state has slightly different conditions and slightly different ways of doing things. And one of the things that I've learned in the field is that getting out there and visiting you guys and seeing what you do has really helped me become better at what I do, because every area is slightly different. Victorian pest controllers, I find, have more of a challenge than anyone. And because of the cold and the temperature variances can be 4 different, temperatures in one day. I'm really good at termite baiting. I'm in sort of central northern New South Wales, and yeah, it's typically a bit easier up here, I find, at least.
I heard that you said that not to put the ever-ready stations in concrete paths. Is that correct?
Just not to
Driveways?
be too close to the external area of the building, because as Alex said, you could be, and there's a chance you could be going into a treated zone, a treated zone you don't know is there. And
Yeah, no, I
also
understand that. Yeah,
the footing of you get a bit of roll out of slab, as you know, if you've been around building sites.
yeah.
Slab's
You want to
not
put it in the
always
drip line.
there, so yeah, you're going to hit things like that. So just typically come out about 400 mil if you can.
Yeah, around the drip line. Yeah, sweet as.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
But you can put them into concrete paths, but if you can avoid it, then obviously it's a little bit easier for us.
What's the reason for avoiding the core drilling, Alex?
Well, it just makes life a bit easier for us. And obviously it's not essential, but if we want to be we can come away from that perimeter. So I always used to sort of put them in landscaping as opposed to concrete if possible, but it's not always possible. I just find that they get a bit more hits in those sort of flower beds areas for me anyway.
So can I just and this is the beauty of termite baiting, guys, that we've all got different things that work for us. I actually found with concrete paths and patios that I actually got better hits in those areas, which it just may be a difference in the area, Alex. So I went through patios or concrete paths, again, not too close to the external wall, usually coming out at least 400 mil, and I found I got really good hits in those areas.
I just think if you're installing the station as per you guys recommend, the hit's going to be there regardless of where it's placed, because the CO2 from the focus that's been installed underneath the station is what's going to bring them there anyway.
Yeah.
Yes and no. That's a good point. When we're installing, there's no actual formula, so to speak, Corey. It's more walking around the perimeter of the house and identifying areas in your expertise that you think would be areas where termites are going to be attracted to naturally without you even adding anything. So, for instance, you come around the house and there's a garden up against the house and there's lots of mulch and moisture there. That's obviously a high risk area, and you want to have some stations in that area. On the other side of the house, you might have 100 mil slab edge exposure, and it's like a beach. It's dry sand, and there's nothing there, nothing organic there. then that's probably a lesser risk area. So it's really identifying those areas in your expertise you think are going to be, yeah, this is a sweet spot to put a few stations.
Just wanted to know with what's the guideline with species of termites? Like for New South Wales, like I know shadows can take a long time to bait. Is it recommended to still bait shadows, or are we just sticking to coptos and nashoots?
Definitely, I'd be baiting shadows. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that, but the length of time in baiting shadows is there's a couple of factors in that. One is, you know, the time of year that they molt. So if termites don't molt, we're obviously chlorpyrrazine has no effect, being a chitin synthesis inhibitor. And so they molt, you know, let's say, for instance, a typical sort of season and shadows are molting 4 or 5 times a year. They might not molt at all during the winter, so you're not going to get a result at that time. And the other factor to keep in mind too is that being a multi-site nester, you need to keep in mind, you know, have I finished baiting one colony and I'm now baiting the second one or the third one or the fourth one? It can be really, really tricky with shadows. But yeah, please investigate that further. If you're on the East Coast as I am, and I'm just north of Sydney, yeah, it's a tricky one with shadows, and you should be get as much advice as you can. If you're up near me, get Greg Welsh out to help you with some of those jobs. Yeah, a lot to learn about shadows.
Yeah, Greg's been amazing. He's been really supportive. So
yeah,
thank
good
you.
stuff.
So Justin's put a question up there about the Sally's no more gaps. That's definitely what you want to be using, a no more gaps. Liquid nails or silicons have all got solvents in there, so you don't want to be using that for your above ground boxes because that'll deter termite feeding for sure.
And you hit the nail on the head, Chris. It is the solvent in some of those silicons that you want to avoid.
The support that you guys give us and our businesses is you always go above and beyond. So
yeah. Thank you, Corey. That's awesome to hear, mate. That's encouraging. All right. Well, we might call it a day then, guys. Awesome stuff. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck.